Welcome, action fans, and thanks for joining us for another edition of All 90s Action All the Time, as we continue our journey looking at some of the highlights and lowlights of action cinema in 1994. I'm your host, Scott Murphy, and this time around, we are doing Forgotten February, where we look at a more obscure action flick. Last year, we did the Viggo Mortensen gangster action flick American Yakuza, and in this spot this time around, we're looking at the little remembered Ice-T survival action thriller Surviving the Game. Alongside me to talk about this one is a returning guest. It is the number one Dolph Lundgren expert and host of the Dolph Lundgren Fancast. I Must Break This podcast. It's Mr. Sean Malloy. Welcome back, Sean.
Oh man, it's the ultimate pleasure, and boy, did you pick an amazing film to discuss today. I've really been looking forward to this one. I just completely unabashedly adore this particular movie, and you actually picked probably the perfect time to discuss it. I know that you're in New Zealand, but here in the States, actually, as of Tuesday, November 7th, the Blu-ray is coming out. Shout Factory has finally put out a Blu-ray of this particular film, so it's pretty serendipitous. Your timing on this one.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, like, obviously this episode won't go out till next year, but like, well, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. They haven't released the special features yet for it, so I of course have it pre-ordered. But I'm looking forward to. You normally Shout Factory usually releases like, okay, you're going to have a commentary here, you're going to have a couple featurettes here, and they have not released anything yet. So I'm curious to see what it's going to have. I'm hoping for a commentary by Ernest Dickerson because I've heard him speak about this film in a couple other interviews. But yeah, I mean, I think, obviously the late Rutger Hauer won't be available, but I mean, a little a trip down memory lane from Ice-T would be pretty welcome and cool. So yeah, we'll have to see.
That'll be awesome. Well, hopefully we'll probably provide a link to that Shout Factory Blu-ray when we put this episode out.
Why would you want to kill yourself? Maybe I like the idea of choosing when I die instead of having somebody else choose for me. If someone offered you a good job, would you be interested? What kind of job are you talking about? We need someone to help us with our hunts out in the wilderness.
Are you sure about this one?
Oh, I'm sure.
Have you got courage?
Gentlemen, I would like you to meet our new hunting guide, Mason.
Here's a toast to the hunters and a prayer for the hunted. The hunt begins now.
Just let me get the door for you. Go.
We're not really gonna hunt anymore, are we?
He's nothing. He's less than nothing.
Come on, Mason!
I won't take any part in this.
I want you!
If you make it to civilization, you live. If you don't, maybe God will have mercy. I think he's gone back to the cabin.
None of them has ever done that before.
Mr. Mason!
What's that smell?
Everybody out of the cabin!
I like not being rare.
Try well done, bitch.
Jack Mason knows he's going to die someday.
Damn, I wish I'd never started smoking.
But today, he's not in the mood.
This is where it gets interesting.
Never underestimate
Come on, Mason!
a man who has nothing to lose. Rutger Hauer, Charles Dutton, Gary Busey, F. Murray Abraham, William McNamara, and Ice-T. Surviving the Game.
Bang!
Directed by Ernest Dickerson.
So before we get into the film, and you can tell us a little bit more about how you discovered the film, I'll go on to today's stats. So the stats for today's film, Surviving the Game, it was released on April 15th, 1994. It was directed by the aforementioned Ernest Dickerson, whose notable credits include the likes of Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, Bones, and Adam Sandler, Damon Wayans action flick Bulletproof. It was written by Eric Berndt, whose other notable credits include Virtuosity, Romeo Must Die, and Highlander Endgame. Review-wise, it currently holds a 32% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 19 reviews, 41 on Metacritic based on 13 reviews. It has a pretty respectable 6.2 out of 10 on IMDb and a similarly respectable 3.1 on Letterboxd. Box office wise, it made $7.7 million off of a $7.4 million budget, making it a bit of a bomb, and also making it the 124th biggest film of 1994, placing just below the Hugh Grant, Sam Neill, Tara Fitzgerald comedy drama Sirens, but one above the divisive Martin Short, Charles Grodin comedy Clifford. However, despite the critical and box office failure, it was apparently a solid hit on VHS and has garnered a small cult following since, I would say.
I would argue actually a large cult following it's garnered since then. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's the thing that, I mean, you said a lot there, but that's the thing that I think the current generation that we have in the streaming age are missing out on. Okay. Because you had all of these films that came out in that early to mid 90s period that maybe didn't really do super hot at the box office, but found their audience via VHS. Okay. And, just got tons of rentals that way and everything. That is how I saw this film, obviously. But you really don't get that nowadays. You know what I mean? You'll get, kind of word of mouth. Oh, check this out. It's on Netflix now. Or, this new show is hot. It's on, Prime right now. And you might hear some people talk about it. But the lasting and the staying power of the films that come out nowadays does not, it's not even close to what we got back in that 90s period, thanks to VHS. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I guess that's, partly just, there's just too much stuff. There's so much of it. It's like, this is the exact sort of film it didn't do that well at the box office that would be, put onto Prime Video, put onto Tubi, whatever, and there's just hundreds, thousands of things on there. It's like, it just gets lost. A lot of these things just get lost in the mix. And you might get one that like pops out and people are excited about. But like, I think that was the magic of like the rental stores and discovering things at VHSs that were often based on kind of arbitrary things of like, oh, the cover art from that looks quite cool. Oh, and it also has somebody I like in it. All right, I'll maybe check it out. Like this. But I don't know. Like, it just doesn't. The streaming services don't have that same thing to them. That you would make those discoveries in the same way.
Yeah. I mean, and this film is, like you said, maybe it didn't do a heck of a lot at the box office. I actually distinctly remember when it did come out in theaters. But man, I mean, there's so much about this film that is amazing that we don't get nowadays. And I realize I sound like an old man River saying that. I mean, but everything from the setting to the characters. Every character in this film has something to work with. You don't see that much these days anymore either. You know what I mean? But I can't remember. Maybe John Wick 4, I would say. Every character that came on screen in that particular film all had a little bit of something to chew on, all had their own little character nuances. But for the most part, you don't see that much. But everybody here on screen delivers, and they all have their moment to shine, which is just amazing for what is in the end a mid-budget cheesy action movie.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess we'll get into it. But I think everybody does have something to do. Although I think the thing about this film and the thing that really makes it work, because like, unlike you, I had not discovered this film until I was researching films to look at in 1994. This one had really passed me by. I not only not seen it, I hadn't heard of it until this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
this is totally new discovery for me. So I won't give my thoughts of like too much. I won't give too much away too early on in the episode of what I thought of it. But yeah, I think that the magic behind what makes this film work is really the actors more than the script.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. I mean, and that's something that we can just go right into right there. What I think is pretty amazing about this particular film is it is an action movie, but there really aren't outside of Rutger Hauer, because Rutger Hauer had done like Wanted Dead or Alive, he had done Blind Fury,
Blind
he had done
Fury.
he did another one called Split Second that I know
Oh
has its
yeah,
fans.
it's like a
Yeah,
sci-fi. I've not seen that one, but I know of it. It's like a kind of sci-fi action horror thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It has its fans. I personally have never been a huge fan of it, but I mean, he's really the only real actor at the time, circa 1994, who had really dipped his toes into the action waters. And so, for the most part, yeah, you have this just. I mean, this is the ultimate. There is not one woman in this entire film. I mean, this is the ultimate guy's guy action movie, and like I said, you have such an amazing pedigree of bona fide talented actors on display. You have F. Murray Abraham. I think by this time he had like what won an Oscar,
Oh
if
yeah,
that's right.
because yeah, he had won an Oscar for his portrayal of Salieri and Amadeus in the
That's right.
80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have him. You have Gary Busey before he really went off the rails. You know what I mean? John C. McGinley, who at the time was starting to become a pretty notable character actor.
Yeah.
Charles S. Dutton, who
It's quite funny. It's quite funny because
yeah.
no, I was just thinking while watching the movie that John C. McGinley and Gary Busey would have starred together just 3 years before in Point Break.
Oh, see, yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. I mean, and then, like I was saying, Charles S. Dutton. I mean, I remember when this had come out, he had a sitcom here in the States that was on the Fox network called Rock. Okay, that was like that was like his big thing. To my knowledge, I think that was pretty much. I think he also did Alien 3 around this period, but I mean, those were like his
Mhm.
real big things. And then you see him show up in this film, and he is just so mean and he's so nasty. You know what I mean? And it is just, I mean, it really is a cool movie. And then, of course, Rutger Hauer is leading the bad dudes. I mean, it has a really cool cast that, like I said, everybody here all gets their moment. I will say right now, I think unfortunately the biggest crime with this film is that Gary Busey, I think, leaves the film a little bit too early. But having said that, I mean, man, everybody still has that moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely know what you mean. And we'll talk more about the Gary Busey thing in just a little bit. But yeah, I think it is an amazing, like when I first like read the cast before I saw this movie, I was like, "Oh, that's an amazing cast of villainy." Like F. Murray Abraham, even though not generally in action films, had played a lot of villains. Obviously, Gary Busey had been one of the villains in Under Siege. Rutger Hauer's played like a number of villains in like Nighthawks and Blade Runner, and there's stuff like that. So I was quite excited to see it. And then obviously, yeah, John C. McGinley, not necessarily villains, but he just plays a lot of dicks, like kind of
Mhm.
asshole type characters, like in Point Break, for example. So yeah, I was, and they really delivered. All of them really delivered. And Charles S. Dutton again, he delivered as well. So I think that was really what makes the film. I think one of the things that was striking to me when I first started watching it though was like how certainly at this stage I feel like Ice-T like bulked up later on in like the 90s and into the 2000s, but like he looks kind of he doesn't look like an action star at the start of the in the film. Like it's kind of, he looks like a kind of unlikely action star, and and they deal with that quite well, I think, because they make him kind of more sneaky rather than like a kind of, you know, Arnie type, you know. But like, was that striking to you as well? I mean, I know you've seen it a number of times, so maybe that wasn't like a thing that popped out at you.
Oh, I think this was his Ice-T's casting was extremely inspired because no,
Yeah.
you're exactly right. I mean, around this time, he had done New Jack City. He had done, I'm trying to think, he had done Ricochet, which is
Yeah.
a very a very lurid action movie from the late '80s, early '90s. I want to say.
Early 90s, I think. And then he'd done
Yeah.
Trespass as well, right?
Yeah, oh, that's right. He did do Trespass, and so I mean, he was at that time making his mark in the in you know not just action movies but film as well. But at the time, I mean, if you when you think about this, I mean that's the thing that I go back to when I first saw this. I remember actually better yet when I first saw the trailer for it. When you think of okay, who is going to be the hero? Who's going to be the one that is going to be not just running for his life, but also picking off each of the hunters. You know, in my mind, I mean, I don't think Ice-T would have. He certainly, for me, would not have been the first person I would have picked out. Especially considering, I know we're going to be probably mentioning it, but this film came out off the heels of Hard Target. Okay, and so that one you have Jean-Claude Van Damme at the lead, and so for this one to where it's Ice-T who's the guy who's the hero. Like I said, that's not someone who I would have picked out, but having said that, I think he is absolutely amazing in this role. I mean, you buy him and believe him as this widowed father, right? Widowed father and also a husband, right? Who has fallen on hard times and is now homeless. I mean, he nails it. I mean, those scenes where he's just mouthing off to Rutger Hauer when Rutger Hauer is underestimating him and everything. I mean, you buy him as being this surly, down on his luck dude who's living on the streets, but also, you know what? He's not going to take shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess like I should probably say two things before we go on. First of all, I've not given the spoiler warning yet, so here's your spoiler warning. Basically, we're going to discuss the whole film in detail. So if you've not watched it and you want to watch it, go away and do that, and then come back and listen to this episode. Second thing is, I'll give you. You mentioned Hard Target, and obviously that's a clear reference point here because this film, because we're not given a plot synopsis yet, is very much similar to Hard Target. It's based once again on the Most Dangerous Game short story, and we are basically there's a bunch of hunters who basically pay lots of money to hunt homeless people, and that's basically Ice-T's character is tricked into doing this. You're going to get a job and stuff like that, and then goes to a log cabin with all these hunters, thinking that he's got a legit job and feeling quite pleased with himself, and then wakes up to find out that he's going to be the prey for that weekend's hunt. And that's basically all the plot synopsis you need, because then the rest of the movie is really just like the kind of second half of the movie is really just a chase. You know, it's a big chase through the forest of the Pacific Northwest, Washington, I think it was filmed in. So that's kind of your plot synopsis. And I have to say, I mean, they do like really ladle it on at the start of the movie. So at the start of the movie, you find out that Ice-T's character has lost his wife and child. Then his dog is run over, and then his best friend dies in the night. At which point he tries to commit suicide, and this is where Charles S. Dutton intervenes and offers him this what on the surface seems like a nice offer, a lucrative job, but actually is a trap.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's that. Man, I mean, and maybe I'm just saying this because of late I've watched a lot of the action films that have popped up on Tubi and Netflix and whatnot. But I mean, you you don't get that kind of character development. At least I can't remember the last time I saw that kind of character development in a film today that is as good there. I mean, within, like you said, the first 15 minutes, you get everything that we need to know about the Ice-T character, but they're bringing in, like, for example, the old man character. Okay, that's his best friend. We have his dog. That's his other best friend. There's the scene where they're trying to steal food from the meat packing plant at the beginning, and one of the guards starts to become a little I guess we'll say stick happy with both Ice-T and his
I think is his
overzealous, yeah. And what's great about that scene too is it allows Ice-T to get the upper hand on the guard. So what that gives us is, I mean, we see this in a lot of action movies of the time, is you always need that one moment early in the film that kind of shows, okay, he can handle himself. You know what I mean? Like, this character can handle himself. And so they give you that just a little bit in the beginning as well. And so, I mean, man, we're talking like the first barely 15 minutes, but it works, man.
Yeah, and it's just they just get away with it, I think. Like, because like there's so many depressing things happen to him in such kind of rapid succession, it almost hits to the point of parody, but not quite. Because I think like it still just works, like, because everybody sells it, like, because Ice-T actually does like a really good job here, acting wise, and so I still bought it, and I still felt like genuinely sad for him. It didn't again, but if like one more bad thing had happened to him, it would have reached like the point of spoof, I think, almost.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I mean, and then when Charles S. Dutton comes in the film, I mean, man, that almost makes his character, I think, to be honest, if you look at all of the hunters in the film, I would argue, and I've always felt this since the first time I would watch it, but I would almost say that Charles S. Dutton is the most despicable. Because, I mean, just for him to be working the soup kitchen lines, okay, pretending to be so kind and so nice, and even when he gives his business card to Rutger Hauer, and Ice-T goes to Rutger Hauer, okay, you can tell that something is amiss and something is off with Rutger Hauer. You know what I mean? But it's Charles S. Dutton's character. That's the one that, I mean, he's the lowest of the low in my opinion. But I mean, it still works. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Like, because there's such the it's so despicable, the kind of the luring of these people, and as if he's giving them this great opportunity. Yeah, and like you say, there's something so sinister about that character. The way he seems on the surface so kind of nice, whereas like you say, like Rutger very much comes across as an action movie villain pretty early on. Like he really gives his hand away,
Oh, he's feeding a bird. You know what I mean? He has like a wild like hawk in his office or whatever, or if I remember right, yeah. But he has like all of these various animals on display, and you can tell immediately. And the other hunters, they just show up. You know what I mean? They just show up to the cabin and they're like, "Oh, hey, it's another hunting trip." But I mean, it's Charles S. Dutton. He's doing all of the sinister, nasty work in making himself seem like a nice guy. And then, I mean, I think it's probably my favorite scene, to be honest, in the film. But when his character does the 180, I think it is just such a fabulous scene where he has the gun pointed at Ice-T as Ice-T's in bed. And when he wakes up, and the way he starts screaming at him, how he starts saying, put your shit on and get up. You know what I mean? And it's like, man, like, I mean, that it's so mean,
It really is. And kind of talking about the other hunters as well. One thing that did confuse me a little bit is during the dinner sequence when they're first together. I feel like the hunters feel very kind of buddy, and it feels like they've known each other for a while. But then as you get into the film, when you get into the film much later, you realize like particularly Griffin and played by John C. McGinley, and Wolf Senior and Junior, it seems like, oh no, they've just bought this trip and this is like their first time. So I was a bit confused by that kind of dynamic because it seemed like they maybe knew each other. I think like I still believe that the Gary Busey character has known Charles Dutton and Rutger Hauer's characters for longer. But yeah, like I found that a little bit confusing. Like that dynamic, the dynamic kind of shifts, and it seems like they're actually less. They've known each other less time than it seems in that first initial sequence in that meeting. I don't know if you felt that as well.
Yeah, no, well, no. I mean, the chemistry and the dynamic between the hunters is wonderful. I mean, I mean that right there could be a fascinating backstory or prequel if we wanted it to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at it, I mean, the way I've always viewed it, if you will, is I think Rutger Hauer and Charles S. Dutton. Those two are the best buddies. Those two are the ones that are, you know, like the closest friends. And I honestly think that was intentional because the way the script plays it out and the way Ernest Dickerson also shoots their scenes together, every time you see them, they're always smiling at one another. There's the scene where they come back to the cabin and they both peek their heads in through the window and they say, "Mr. Mason," and they say it at the same time. You know what I mean? And then, I mean, if you go, not to get too spoiler heavy, but if you go later on in the film when Charles S. Dutton is dying, it's Rutger Hauer who kind of puts him out of his misery. I mean, he even says, you know, you're gonna take a nap. You know what I mean? And he's the one who puts him out of his misery. And then you get that wonderful scene of Rutger Hauer standing up and he's kind of, you know, composing himself and everything. That was his best buddy. You know what I mean? And I think the psychiatrist, Gary Busey, those are buddies too, but those are more on the level of acquaintances. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, no, I got you. I got you for sure. And I think we should probably talk a bit more now about Gary Busey's character, Doc Hawkins, who's quite the crazy character. And it's interesting because, like, I do feel that, you know, Gary Busey is one of those actors who is a talented actor who sadly, you know, because of various reasons, it kind of became a parody of himself. You know, you hire Gary Busey, you know, it's just like you get like what is the Gary Busey persona that's baked in. But at this stage, he's still kind of acting, you know, as a character, even though the character is crazy. Yeah, for sure. And he gives this great monologue, which I found out in the trivia. This monologue that he has about, like, you know, his childhood and how his father, you know, forced him to fight this dog to the death. Like this was not in the script; it was improvised, and Rutger Hauer apparently was very not happy with this improvised monologue because, like, basically he didn't get on with Gary Busey, and also he thought like he's trying to steal the movie away from me, and he certainly steals this scene. And it's a great monologue, and Rutger Hauer actually kind of called the story out, and apparently there is a cut of it where Rutger Hauer's character says, "Oh, that's bullshit," or something like that. But Ernest Dickerson decided to scrap that cut and you know, just have the cut, you know, that we see in the movie where Gary Busey just tells the story to Ice-T. So yeah, I think the great thing about this monologue, I think it's one of the highlights of the movie, but I was thinking that this film kind of has something in common with the last film that we talked about together, Joshua Tree, whereas, like, it's one of the highlights of the movie, but it also ends up being kind of a weakness because it sets Gary Busey up as being, like, at least the number 2 threat. Like, he should, you know, like, you think it kind of sets his character up as like, oh, he's probably going to be like maybe the penultimate character who dies. Like, you presume that Rutger Hauer is top baddie from the get-go, so you always presume that Rutger Hauer will die last. But
he'll be the last one, yeah.
But I think that scene kind of sets up Gary Busey almost being the second last one. And I know I've read things that both from the screenwriter and the director Ernest Dinkelson, that they both said that if they were to do the movie again, they would have had Gary Busey's character die much later on in the movie and have more of Doc Hawkins, because like while he is on screen, it's quite the turn. Like I'll let you talk now.
Yeah, no, I mean obviously I think they're going for misdirection. You know what I mean? Which it works. You know what I mean? I mean, it's certainly. I mean, that's some real misdirection there. When you see Gary Busey on the cast lineup, yeah. I mean, when I first saw this one, I honestly thought the list of hunters that were going to be picked off, it was going to go. To be perfectly honest, if I'm going to be blunt, I thought it was going to be F. Murray Abraham and his son who were going to be the first ones to go. Okay, then Charles S. Dutton, then Gary Busey and Rutger Hauer. Obviously, they didn't do it that way. And I mean, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the IMDb trivia, because who knows how much truth there is to what is on there. But one of the things that I read on there was that the big reason why they made F. Murray Abraham the last one, other than Rutger Hauer, was because he had that Academy Award, and they figured star power was going to trump everything else. I don't know how much truth there is to it, but I mean, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate once Gary Busey goes, Charles S. Dutton goes, and then John C. McGinley's character goes. A lot of the threat in the film kind of disappears as well, because William McNamara, as much as he tries, he's not. You know, he doesn't pose much of a threat either. And F. Murray Abraham, great actor, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I wish they would have redone that. But you know what? Again, if what they were going for was misdirection, then it certainly works on that end, you know?
I'm not entirely sure I mean, particularly because that monologue is improvised, I'm not entirely sure they were going for misdirection. I think that, like, Gary Busey kind of on his own behalf maximalized his own part, and I think they made. I think it was supposed to be a small part, and he was as far as I'm aware, he's supposed to be the first character to die, but like he just made his role bigger for himself. Which, yeah. But like you say, you're right, because, because it ends up being at the end, the three characters, like Rutger Hauer, F. Murray Abraham, and William McNamara's character. The threat level definitely goes down. And you kind of feel like, and I guess like that takes away. That's the unfortunate thing, that it kind of takes away some of the tension of the film, because like obviously you're like, oh well, and even from the very beginning almost, because like when Ice-T takes out Gary Busey, because he's presented himself as such a sinister figure and such like a kind of crazy whacked out character and like an imposing character, that when he takes him out, it's like, oh well, if it takes him out, he'll probably be fine. Like it's probably all good.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, but he does get a wonderful one-liner. That's the cool thing about when you hire someone like Ice-T. You know what I mean? Is he gets just great one-liners. Just how he when he throws Gary Busey through the window into the burning cabin, and he says, "Try it, well done, bitch." You know what I mean? It's just and if we're going along with improv, then I gotta believe probably the whole "try it, well done" was in the script, but him adding the vernacular of "bitch" on there as well, I'd be willing to bet that was all Ice-T. He threw that. he tacked that on there and ran with it.
I could definitely imagine that for sure. And yes, yeah. I think like that's the best one-liner in the movie, and it's just so perfectly set up. Because you have Gary Busey saying that he likes his meat rare, and then Ice-T throws him into a burning building and delivers that line that you just said. And it's a really great moment. It's one of those kind of crowd cheering moments. I was going to say as well that I was just thinking, if the IMDb trivia is true that F. Murray Abraham got more screen time and was in more of the movie because of his Oscar win, like, I don't quite understand the logic of that, because like, because for me, thinking like, you're making this film for an action audience. Now, F. Murray Abraham won his Oscar for Amadeus. Now, there is obviously, I'm not wanting to stereotype too much. I'm sure plenty of action fans have seen Amadeus or watch dramas and watch all sorts of different cinema or whatever. But in terms of like crossover, is there a massive crossover there? Will the F. Murray Abraham being on the box be like a big draw for an action audience? I would suggest probably not.
Well, I mean, that's a great point. But then again, in 1994, was Ice-T and Rutger Hauer really a huge draw for an action audience? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Not.
I mean,
yeah,
I distinctly, I mean, but I see where you're going with that. But I distinctly remember the trailer right before we went recording. I had to go back and I had to watch the trailer again because I think it's just an awesome trailer. And this was marketed and sold as it should have been, as an ensemble piece. I mean, if you go back to Hard Target, that's a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie through and through, right? But this particular film, if you watch the trailer, I mean, they go in order and they list all the bad dudes first before Ice-T. So I don't know if you've seen this or not, but they start out, they say Rutger Hauer, F. Murray Abraham, Charles Dutton, Gary Busey, and Ice-T. And it's like, wow, huh? And he's the good guy, you know what I mean? And so it's just interesting. But having said all that, though, man, I mean, and that's the biggest compliment that I can give this film is just everybody has their moment. I mean, even John C. McGinley, who comes off as just being this total cowboy hick, hunter who maybe is a little racist. They kind of hint at a little bit, but I mean, he gets that moment in the cave where he has his moment. He gets to let loose. And so I don't know, man. I almost kind of wonder if maybe Ernest Dickerson, when he came on board, he said, because a lot of directors like to do that. They like to say, hey, I want you to kind of take your character and run with it. You know what I mean? So one of the things on the IMDb trivia, again, is that they all got to pick their vehicles. Okay, they all got to pick what vehicles they wanted, and Rutger Hauer insisted on having the feather in his on his ear or whatever. And so I can't help but wonder if when Ernest Dickerson came on, as he said, hey, I want everybody to kind of have like their own little monologue or their own moment. And John C. McGinley, when he has that moment with Ice-T in the cave, we see that he's also kind of a tortured soul. You know what I mean? And he's starting to kind of sympathize with our quote unquote hero. You know what I mean? And Scott, we just don't get, you don't get those kind of pathos in an action movie these days. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, no, I know what you mean. But like, so for the listeners, if you've not seen this movie, John C. McGinley's character arc is wild. Like,
it's crazy.
So like the way we're introduced to John C. McGinley is the group are all greeting, like Ice-T is meeting the group. He's being introduced to Wolf Senior and Junior, and oh yeah, I like Wolf Senior works on Wall Street, which makes him the Wolf of Wall Street. Anyway, he's getting introduced to everybody, and Griffin is just staring him down, and it's like, all right, I've got to be in this character. He's just staring at him, fixed eyes, and he does that at like dinner as well, and he seems like, all right, so this guy is like some sort of like stoic badass that's like, just cold as ice, right? That's his character. And then his character is very shouty and almost childlike. His character becomes almost childlike once the hunt starts, because he thinks he sees Ice-T's character, but he doesn't. And he's like, I really saw him. And then like F. Murray Abraham takes his shot and he has like a complete hissy fit. And you're like, okay, so now the character is like whiny man-child. And then we get to the cave scene, and suddenly they give him pathos, and it's like, oh no, this guy's just like a broken husk of a man because he lost his wife and child. So like that
Who has
character arc for
asthma.
me was just crazy.
Yeah. But we should also say too, he has asthma. Like,
Oh
what
yes, that's
a
right. He
wacky-
also has asthma.
like what a wacky little character nuance to tack onto what is in the end just a henchman character. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I can't help but wonder, like, I mean, I'd be willing to bet that was John C. McGinley. I think John C. McGinley came on board and he said, I think it'd be kind of cool if we gave my character asthma. To show that he is a little vulnerable, that he is a little, what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, it's just like a little touch like that is that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of, like you said, it is kind of wacky. The character arc and dynamic that he kind of goes through in the film. What's really interesting about this too is I think you've covered it. Have you covered Judgment Night already on the podcast?
Yes, we did cover Judgment Night. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So this film and Judgment Night, I remember when this film came out. I mean, I had my select action titles or whatever, and this and Judgment Night were two films that I always watched on repeated viewings. And if you look at both of those films, they're pretty similar to an extent. But what's really interesting is how in both films you have the villains, tracking a hero down kind of through their domain, if you will, right? And so, you have Ice-T, kind of like Emilio Estevez and those dudes in those movies. These are just kind of unassuming, regular guys. So them taking out every single one of the hunters would not be 100% believable. And so what the script does to kind of bypass that is they say, okay, well, we're going to have the head villain, the main bad dude, to kind of exert his power and just show how evil he is, okay? And also to kind of let our hero kind of cut some slack off his shoulders to, again, show that he's a regular guy. Well, then we're going to have the head villain. He's going to pick off one of his own, okay? And so what does Rutger Hauer do, okay, in that scene after the cave scene is he shoots John C. McGinley in the head. And if you go to Judgment Night, what does Dennis Leary do to kind of get rid of one of his henchmen? Well, he drowns him. You know what I mean? And I always thought that was kind of wild how if you go to Cliffhanger did something very similar where John Lithgow takes out one of his own as well. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting that it's kind of action movie shorthand, if you will, but it works.
Oh yeah, I definitely think it works. It's I guess it's just a great kind of shorthand way to show you just how ruthless and villainous this character truly is. And to go back on a previous point you made about the asthma thing, I wouldn't surprise me if that was like a kind of John C. McGinley kind of choice. And I think actually one of the biggest strengths of this film is you get the sense watching it that the actors had a lot of freedom. There was a script, definitely. They probably, they I'm sure 90% of the script is on the screen, but I do feel that they were allowed to be given these quirks. Obviously Gary Busey had his monologue. Rutger Hauer got to choose to make some costume choices and some choices to do with his bike and different things and how and they really were allowed to create their own characters and give them kind of extra things, and I think it really pays off. I think that's the real strength of this movie, that you've got a great collection of great actors and you've given them quite a lot of freedom to we've got the main part of the canvas, but you can paint the outsides in the way that you want.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, I remember reading an article about John Woo when he would come on films, as he would, especially with Face Off, he said, "I want you guys to be able to pick your guns." You know what I mean? I want the actors to be able to kind of embody the characters, understand the characters, and become those characters. And so I want you guys to pick the weapons that your characters use. Hence why Nicolas Cage in that film has those gold-plated dual guns, because he felt that's what Castor Troy would do. And so, yeah, I remember again reading the trivia that they got to pick their own the vehicles that they drive. So Rutger Hauer. It sounds like Rutger Hauer might have had a little bit of an ego on this film. He was like, I'm the main bad guy, so I get to be the best of everyone. And so what was it I read? That he picked a certain Yamaha type dirt bike because he felt it would look the most imposing in the lead for everybody. And it's kind of like, okay, you know what I mean? And so, yeah.
Like, I don't know. I mean, like having watched like some stuff in the movie, as far as I'm aware, Rutger Hauer didn't seem to really butt heads with anybody apart from Gary Busey. That seems to have been the main kind of heat on set. Apparently got on very well with Ice-T, and I'm not really sure about the rest of the cast, but it seems like that was the main beef that was there. So yeah, I mean, I guess like it seems like he maybe did have a bit of ego, because like in the sense of like, I think he was pretty pissed off that like Gary Busey was trying to upstage him all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and also, to be fair, maybe it's not fair to say that he had an ego on this film, but if he did, I mean, come on, man. I mean, he's Blade Runner, right? Nighthawks. I mean, these are legendary villains. You know what I mean? And so he's on this film where he's the lead hunter. Well, then, damn it, he's going to have the best motorcycle and the this feather on his on his head that he's going to be wearing to kind of let everyone know that he's the lead hunter, in the film.
True. And to be fair to Rutger Hauer, like I've never heard really any kind of bad kind of set stories in terms of Rutger Hauer. So in this beef, because of things that I have heard about Gary Busey, I'm like, I feel like I'm more on Rutger's site.
Yeah. Well, he wrote. I've never read it, unfortunately, but he wrote an autobiography that came out quite a few years ago. But what's really unfortunate about it is, I think all he really talks about is Blade Runner in that book, is what I hear. Because I mean, that's his most famous role. But man, it'd be really cool if there were some more background stories on this particular film. I would recommend you, because I know that.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did. Yeah. It's a point that connects to your point. I've not read the book either, but I did watch a Joe Blow video that covered this movie, and they mentioned that in the book that this film is mentioned, and he mentions how much he hated Gary Busey, and he also mentions how much he enjoyed working with Ice-T, and how he really liked Ice-T. So I don't know how much of a mention this film gets, but it certainly must have got a brief mention, even if it was just those two things.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, I will say, I know that you're a huge I know that you're a big horror guy, and so I don't know if you've ever listened to, but Mick Garris does a podcast, and he did an episode a few years ago where he interviewed Ernest Dickerson. And if you have not listened to that, it's a wonderful interview. But Ernest Dickerson does, take a sidetrack and talks about surviving the game quite a bit in that particular episode, and he tells some really fun stories about the making of this one. I'll have to go back and listen, but the one story that I remember him telling was that Ice-T, he was still kind of how do you want to say this? He was not very looked highly upon by police, I think we can say. And so, because he had the song Cop Killer or whatever. Yeah. And so when they were making the movie, obviously they needed security, and no police officers would do security for him. They said, absolutely not, because of the song. And so Ernest Dickerson ended up having to go outside police authorities to get security, and he ended up using some retired Hells Angels, I guess, to run security for this action movie in the forest. You know what I mean? So I can only imagine just how wild this set was.
Yeah, I can definitely only imagine. Yeah, I mean, I guess that song probably got him in a lot of trouble. It's pretty ironic that Ice-T would go on to star in Law and Order for like
Oh,
20 years.
oh yeah. Everybody has made that connection. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah.
I just thought
It's wild, yeah, but no, you're exactly right. But I would also say too, to be honest, if you look at Ice-T in his output, the late '90s, early 2000s, he was doing a slew of just a ton of action titles. I mean, he had a few kind of outliers, if you will, in that period. He did Tank Girl. You know what I mean? He did that one. That one. I think the less said about that one, the better. But I would argue, I imagine, I think surviving the game kind of opened doors for him and made him an action guy, especially for kind of the low rent direct to video independent films. Because my God, I remember going through Blockbusters and Hollywood Videos, and he did at least, I think, 3 films that involved airplanes or stealth fighters or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, so this film really opened a lot of doors and helped out Mr. Ice-T's bank account, I will say. So it worked out for him.
Oh yeah, for sure. I definitely think this was uh yeah, a part of Ice-T's journey into being like a kind of leading guy in a lot of direct to video kind of action flicks, particularly in that kind of uh mid to late 90s into the early 2000s before he joined Law and Order kind of period. For sure, for sure. I I
Can I,
would
can I can I
Yep,
just add one more thing real quick that we haven't talked about?
yep.
But the other thing that I've always really appreciated about this film, and I think this is key not just for any action movie, but for movies in
Mhm.
general, is to have a set that or have a setting that really works and that really feels alive. And the thing that I love about this is, I mean, you could say, okay, the cabin, they probably had to obviously build the cabin, but everything else about this film is real. I mean, they are really running through a forest. They are really climbing, maybe they're fake trees, I guess we can say, but I mean, they are really in the elements of this film, which I really like. There was a Van Damme movie that he did a few years ago called Enemies Closer, which is not great. Okay, but what's interesting about that one is that's another film where Van Damme is the bad dude hunting this other guy through the woods. But what the film does is, I'd say about 90% of that movie all takes place in the dark. It all takes place at nighttime, and I think one of the big reasons they did that was to kind of mask what little budget they had that they were working with, as opposed to this film. Man, they're using natural daylight. You know what I mean? Not only does this take
Mhm.
place in the forest, in these woods of what is it, the Northwest or whatever of the United States, but I mean, man, they're
I
letting
think it's somewhere it's like a forest in
the
Washington.
Pacific Northwest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, they're letting the natural daylight do pretty much all of the heavy lifting in this film, and as a result, it just looks amazing. It looks so good.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was going to mention that for sure because one thing that you can definitely tell, or I've certainly noticed, um, when cinematographers go into directing, even if the movie's not that great, for example, we covered the Steven Seagal movie The Patriot on the podcast a while back, and that's a pretty terrible movie. But that's directed by Dean Semler, who was a cinematographer in the Mad Max films and won an Oscar for Dances with Wolves and stuff like that. And he really shot the shit out of it, even though it's not a great movie. And Ernest Dickerson obviously kind of got his big start as like Spike Lee's cinematographer. And I think again you can really tell that this movie was made by a cinematographer because it looks, yeah, I mean, like the way the kind of forest is shot and the way you get some aerial shots and all this kind of stuff, it really, even though the budget isn't, it's kind of mid-sized budget for the time, it's just not that big. They really make the most of it, and you get some really great shots. And I think like Ernest Dickerson's cinematographer background really pays off in this movie.
And how cool would that have been? I mean, I'm just putting myself in Ernest Dickerson's shoes. But I imagine, I mean, if you look at his pedigree, I mean, I don't think there's one film of his that I thought was terrible. I mean, even Bones, with Snoop Dogg is a pretty serviceable horror movie, to be perfectly honest. But I mean, I would like to think he had to have a blast on this film. I mean, can you imagine just, okay, your job is going into the woods with 6 actors and filming those scenes, and you're really not having to worry about, extras or anything like that. You're just going into the forest to shoot your scenes for the day. Okay, today it's going to be where this tree falls down over a river and they're going to be crossing that. Okay, and then tomorrow we're going to do the cave scene. I mean, but he's really only having to handle 6 actors to really worry about and wrangle. And again, in the woods too. That had to be just a fun as hell shoot, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it must have been. I think like in terms of like working with those actors and having that experience, I think that must have been cool. Shooting in like a kind of in like nature like that, um, you know, also kind of complicated as well. And I mean, this is pretty in terms of like his directing career is pretty early on. It's only his second feature film, so I would guess it's probably be quite intimidating as well. Like having that kind of scope and trying to film all these action sequences. And I guess we've not really talked too much about the actual action that happens in the film, but there's some really impactful action sequences, throughout the movie, and we get some, real good use of the forest and the nature, and there's the scene of like Ice-T running away and like jumping off that cliff into the river and stuff like that. So we get some really great action, particularly once it gets into the action, because it's it doesn't really get into the meat of the action for a while. It's like just over 90 minutes, and it's about I clocked it as 36 minutes when Ice-T gets woken up with a gun in his face and the action really begins. But once it gets out the starting blocks, it really hits hard after that, I feel.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, and again, 36 minutes, I didn't ever really notice that or clock that. But I mean, think about everything we know about the characters within 36 minutes. You know what I mean? And again, I can't, I don't want to repeat myself again, but I mean, you get enough. It works wonderfully.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd absolutely agree with you. Um, one thing that's kind of funny, and I don't know if there's like another cut of this movie that's like maybe there's a different cut in DVD, or I'm not sure, but basically the cut that I saw on when I rented it on YouTube, um, it's quite confusing. The scene where Griffin is in the cave, because basically what happens is um, the hunters come across this tree that's got some cigarettes in it. They think they've kind of found Ice-T because they followed the smoke and they're like, "Ah, what an idiot," like, and they're just following the smoke and he's just smoking but no, it's a trick, it's a trap, and the tree is smoking, and then there's like and it's daytime, and then there's this really weird, awkward edit, and then it cuts to nighttime and Rutger Hauer smoking a cigarette on some rocks, and then saying to F. Murray Abraham, "Don't worry about it, we'll just get some sleep. I know exactly where he is. He's in that cave over there." And then we go to the cave, and he's got Griffin, John C. McGinley's character, trapped. He's captured them. But like, you just don't get a sense of like when that happened at all. Certainly in the version that I saw.
Interesting. I mean, I've only ever seen the VHS. Interestingly, yeah, I saw the VHS and then bought the DVD. The DVD is pretty bare bones, so I'm really looking forward to the Blu-ray. Perhaps maybe the Blu-ray will kind of clean some of that up, and we'll have alternate versions and alternate cuts. I will let you know as soon as I check it out. So
Yeah, right. But certainly in the version that you saw, there's that weird edit as well. So you don't get a sense of
Yes.
like him capturing Griffin.
Yes.
He just suddenly has him.
He
Okay.
just suddenly has them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right. Okay.
yeah. And it's also, I mean, that's, I mean, and I always thought that too regarding that particular scene where Rutger Hauer, has the binoculars and he's saying, "Oh, he's right up there. I know where he is." And I remember when I first saw this as a kid, when I was like 11 years old, I was like, "Well, then why don't you just go get him now?" But I guess maybe scaling some of those rocks at nighttime or whatever probably wasn't the best idea. I don't know, but anyway.
Yeah. I guess the other weird thing about that scene as well is like he points to the cave and the cave looks bright orange as if there
It's
is a
lit.
fire, as if there is a
It's
fire
exactly.
burning. And then
Yeah.
it cuts to the cave and there is no fire burning.
Well, but when they go into the cave, they do see the fire has been burnt out or whatever. There's like remnants of it, which is one of those things where I always thought to myself too, like Ice-T, if you're on the run from these guys, why would you start a fire? You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I'm trying to think of any other scenes that I've always liked. I mean, I will say, I always laughed unintentionally, I should say, at William McNamara's scream that he does. There's the scream when right when Rutger Hauer shoots John C. McGinley. That freaks out William McNamara, and he starts screaming, "Dad, Dad!" And and I mean, it was one of those things that it was kind of like, okay, how old is this character here?
Yeah, I don't like that. That character doesn't quite make sense to me because like he's as wimpy or as badass as the script wants him to be at any given time. So like he, sometimes he seems like really kind of sniveling and kind of like, oh no. And then other times, like when he saves his dad from the fire, he seems like kind of really competent. And then like in that scene where he's dad, he seems again kind of like childlike. And then like like a scene later where he's like telling his dad off and they telling him he wants nothing to do with him. Once they finish with this, then I'm done with you. And again, he seems like a much stronger character, much stronger willed character. So yeah, his character doesn't really make sense to me much throughout the film.
Well, and he makes a comment too later on. It's the big moment where he is telling his dad off. It's the big moment where he's telling his dad, "I'm not like you, okay, and this is wrong and everything." But then he says a line in there where he says, "I'll help you kill Mason." And it's like, well, wait a minute here, dude. Like, if you do that, you're doing what your dad wants you to do. You're going to kill an innocent homeless man here.
Yeah.
Like, how is that standing up?
That I thought a lot about that as well because like that line really hit me. I've been like, like he basically says like, oh, I might have to kill this guy, and I'm like, whoa, hold on. Like I thought the whole point of this character is like he's got like a moral compass and he doesn't want to do it.
Moral,
like
he's the moral audience cipher.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, what are you doing, you psychopaths? Like, no, you shouldn't hunt people. And that's the whole point of his character. And then he just throws the line out that like, yeah, sure, I might have to kill this guy. And you're like, what? Then that just makes you just as bad as your dad. Like, what you? Yeah. So like you, like that line kind of spoils the whole character. And then like, yeah, when that character does die, you no longer care because you're like, well, fuck, you're just as bad as the rest. It turns out, just you think you're more moral.
But what the script does again is it's not going to have Ice-T kill the one hunter that has a moral conscience. So you know what I mean? And so again, it's pretty strategic how the script does that. Okay. It's not gonna have Ice-T. We have no problem him killing the other characters. Okay. But it's not gonna have him kill the one that has some good in him. And so the way William McNamara dies is he just falls off the log. and on, he loses his balance or whatever, and completely falls off. And so it's like, well, that wasn't Ice-T's fault there. That was William McNamara, and also that was Dad for taking him there in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and like you say, it is pretty strategic because the same thing happens with Griffin. Like, again, we established that Ice-T is only going to pick out characters who are trying to kill him in the moment. He won't kill a defenseless character, and he won't kill a character who's not trying to kill him. So he's only ever going to execute people who are actively trying to execute him. At that time, to proving that he is, the good guy. I mean, it's pretty obvious that you're going to be rooting against the people hunting homeless people. But we really firmly established that he's never going to take out somebody who's like defenseless or whatever. Which is how Griffin has a change of heart and is executed for it by Rutger Hauer's character. I did want your take on the Charles S. Dutton death. Like, I think that there is like an emotional payoff in the sense of like Rutger Hauer's reaction to the death, which I think gives it a bit more gravitas. But the way it blows up, and I don't know the way, it's kind of so over the top. And his legs are blown off, and like there's something over the top, and it almost made me laugh. But then Rutger Hauer, the way Rutger Hauer reacts to it, like brought me back into the movie, and then and then it worked for me. But I don't. Am I just sick or?
No, I mean, I think it sells their friendship wonderfully. I mean, the great thing about that scene, and I think a lot of it is because you have just two amazingly accomplished actors doing that. I mean, but if you really wanted, you could take out all of their scenes earlier in the film, okay, and then just have that moment, and you get everything you need to know about their friendship from that scene. Okay, I think it is interesting the way Charles S. Dutton plays it, how he's, completely, I don't even know how you describe him. I mean, but he's just, he doesn't even know what's going on. He's mumbling and everything like that. But then you almost kind of wonder, well, I think if someone who does get their legs blown off, I think maybe they might be completely out of it, not even knowing what planet they're on at the moment. You know what I mean? And so I think maybe that might have been Charles S. Dutton's, additive, his ingredient to the script. I don't know. I mean, no, Scott, I don't think you're sick at all. I think it's it's meant to be fun. I mean, the thing that I've kind of gone back to multiple times on this film, I can't decide if I like it or not, but I feel like the ending doesn't have the greatest payoff. I will say. I mean, that's one of my gripes about this film. I feel like a film, that takes place, in the woods, you know what I mean, where there's hunting and everything like that, and then for it to end in an alley, okay, in like this, street alley. But I guess now that I'm verbalizing it to you, I guess it makes sense because now it's on Mason's turf, right? The hour beforehand was all on the hunter's ground. Well, now he's leveling the playing field and it's on his turf. So I guess that makes sense, but the thing I've never really liked is Rutger Hauer's costume at the end. So he's trying to adopt a new identity, and he's trying to move on. So how is him being an Orthodox priest going to help him adopt this new identity and leave town? I have no idea.
I don't. I really don't know. Yeah, I think it is a bit of a. I mean, I guess I kind of thought like, I guess I kind of thought it kind of makes sense just because, like, obviously we first meet Charles S. Dutton's character in a kind of church outreach, and like, so I imagined that maybe they have like fake identities, and they like part of their partnership is like fake religious organization, like or something like that.
Okay.
Like I was trying to make sense of it in my head. I've been like, well, I guess like there's Charles S. Dutton. He was part of like a kind of church, and like maybe so it maybe kind of makes sense that this is one of their kind of things, their kind of things to put people off the track. I don't know, but yeah, like you say, it does look a bit weird, and yeah, I guess like towards the end of the movie, it's not quite as impactful because before we get to the alley, the last thing we get is in the forest is we have Mason fight Wolf Senior, and again because like all the major threats have already been conquered, you kind of feel like, well, there's no real stakes to this fight because we feel by this stage that Mason can easily take out Wolf Senior, and I think also the problem with that fight is like it's shot at nighttime and it's quite dark and you can't really see much. It's kind of hard to see at certain points what's actually happening in the fight. But then he kind of breaks his neck, and then we have like Rutger Hauer's character playing a trick on Ice-T, and he kind of blows up his own plane and thinks he's killed Mason, at that point. But then it's revealed that Mason is alive. That's another question I was going to ask you. Before we get to the alley sequence, do you think it would have been better if it was revealed that we just cut to the alley sequence? We just cut to Rutger Hauer as the priest, and we didn't see beforehand that Mason was alive, and then it is revealed that Mason is alive as Rutger Hauer like is walking in the alley, or like he starts just hearing Mason's voice taunting him.
That's a
just to
good
give
point.
that
Yeah.
little bit of extra tension. It's only like a minute's difference or whatever, but just to give that little bit of extra tension of like, oh, maybe Mason really is dead just for a second, even though you probably still believe that he's got to be alive.
I never thought about that. I've never thought about that. I mean, I think artistically, it is a really cool shot of the plane blowing up. Okay, and the way Mason stands up in slow motion, kind of letting you know that he is still alive. I think that is a really cool shot. But no, you bring up a good point. I don't know how necessary that is. I think it would have worked well if we find out that he is back. That he made it back. That's the one thing, to be honest, that I've always wondered more is how did Mason make it back? And I mean, for him to make his way all the way back, I mean, because they do say like how many weeks later it is, isn't it? Isn't it like 2-3 weeks later or something?
3.
Or is it 3 days?
Oh yes, right. That's right. I think in the trivia it says, it mentions this scene. It says 3 weeks, but actually, I think it's actually just 3 days.
Okay, just 3 days. So I've always wondered, like, man, how was it he was able? Because I mean, they had to take a plane there and everything. So
Yeah.
like, how did Mason make it back in that amount of time? Like, how did he do it? He had to be starving. But then again, I guess he's a badass with nothing left to lose. You know what I mean? So I mean, that's the thing that I've never understood is how in the hell he was able to make it back in one piece and meet up with Rutger Hauer. But then again, I mean, I guess the more I'm verbalizing it to you, I do think it is kind of a cool dichotomy of putting the hunter into the victim's playground. You know what I mean? But he's not in there enough for them to really have fun with that. I don't think.
No, because it's just kind of like the last kind of 5 minutes at the end. Yeah, I mean, like you said, you could have made it maybe a slightly longer section, not like too long, but like even if it was just like 15 minutes or something, or just that little bit longer, and kind of played with that environment it's slightly more. But yeah, no, I think it is like a solid concept of having taking it back to the streets, where really it's like you say, it's Mason's playground. It's instead of the Burns character. So I think that does work. Although, and part of me does love it, but part of me does think it's very silly, is there's a really good callback line where Ice-T is like, remember when you're picking up a gun, something you should always, you should always do when you're picking up a gun is always check the barrel, which is callback to the best friend character said to him when he finds a gun in the kind of opening 10-15 minutes. And then,
oh yeah, it's great. It's great.
Which is a great callback line, and like Ice-T really delivers well. And then Rutger Hauer's character like kind of dies kind of slightly off screen. Like basically the barrel blows up, and it's almost like a kind of Looney Tunes death, which made me laugh. But yeah, it is one of those things that it is just the right side of dumb, I think. Like it made me laugh, but I was still entertained by it, and I still thought like, yeah, that's a good way for an action villain to go out. It's one of those things. It's a very fine line you're playing with of like just how dumb you can push something, and I think it just makes it. What about you, Sean?
Well, I mean, it is a cool scene. I mean, when I first saw this, I always thought it was really kind of cool because he says there's something you always do when you pick up a gun, always check the barrel, and then bam, we get a blast, and then there's like a really cool. If you notice in the score, it does a really cool guitar strum. And it goes immediately, and then it goes right into the credits. It doesn't overstay its welcome or anything. It is a cool scene. However, okay, if we're gonna put this film, realistically, Rutger Hauer is like this expert hunter, right? So wouldn't he know that you check a barrel too? You know what I mean? Like I would find it hard to believe that someone who does this for a living that he would do that. But I mean, it works out, and it's one of those things where anyone who studies film knows about the Chekhov's gun moment, and so you wonder at the beginning of the movie when he finds a gun, his old man friend is telling him, you always check a barrel, and it's like, oh boy, this is going to come in handy later, isn't it? You know what I mean? So,
yeah,
but
actually, on that, talking about Chekhov's gun, there is a kind of Chekhov's gun kind of missed opportunity in this movie, because there is a point in the film where Ice-T is first running away from the cabin that he runs headfirst into a wolf, and that wolf does not come back to maul Wolf Sr.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. You're right. Yeah, that I didn't even think about that too. Yeah, I mean, if you want to go further, I mean, it would have been kind of cool if maybe it ended. I mean, maybe there is a deleted scene that's going to be on that shout, but wouldn't it be cool if Ice-T is now scoping out the soup kitchen line, making sure that everyone there is on the up and up, and no other victims are going to fall prey to this nefarious operation.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool if there was like an extra scene like that. Yeah, you mentioned like the guitar strum at the end as well. I think like one of the only things we've not really talked about is the score, and like I have to say, overall, there's some nice moments in the score. But I thought the score was actually one of the weaker points. Like I feel like it's a very And I mean, accomplished person who did the score. It was Stuart Copeland from The Police. But I thought it was a bit of a mixed bag, and I thought it had a kind of very kind of DTV feel. It kind of felt like a kind of cheaper score. I don't know if you felt the same way.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of the. I mean, if you go to the opening title sequence, I mean, it's all done to this. There's kind of this like Hunter drum beat that kind of underscores a lot of it, but then it plays a lot of like classical saxophone type music. You know what I mean? Especially at the beginning, and then again at the end. I don't really know why. I mean, I guess we can assume Ice-T's character, that's what he listens to. There's a scene where he has the radio and he's in the bathtub and he's, just relaxing. That's kind of his music or whatever. But it is an interesting score that they use to kind of carry a lot of the scenes. It's not enough to make it make or break for me, but it is a very interesting, inspired choice. But I think it's a choice that certainly helps it. At the end of the day, I think it helps it stand out as being a bit of an outlier compared to all of the other action stuff that came out in 1994 too.
Yeah, although I think that it's kind of a mixture as well, because like I do feel like and I don't think this is the best version of it, because I think like a lot of the guitar is like a little bit kind of tinny and kind of cheaper feeling, but it does have like that very kind of twangy bluesy guitar bits to it that is very early to mid 90s action.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So, yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to checking out this Shout Blue. I will, of course, email you, what the specifics are on it, as I'm hoping for some good stuff to be delivered, because this has been one film that has been absent from Blu-ray forever. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing it on my TV in high definition, especially with all of those wonderful cinematography shots as well. I think it's one of those ones that's gonna look pretty good. The cover, I don't know if you've seen the cover. The cover is a little problematic. I'm not a huge fan of the cover that they chose, but yeah, no, it should be cool. I just have to wait 2 more days, Scott, 2 more days, and then I'll be able to check it out.
Excellent. And then obviously by the time this episode goes out in February, we'll know all about it, and we'll be able to tell you all about it, listeners, and give you a link to it. And if you want to pick up the Blu-ray, if this episode has kind of piqued your interest, if you've seen the film and you didn't know there was a Blu-ray, or if you've not seen the film and you just want to check it out. So I guess we kind of covered everything. So if you've got any kind of final thoughts, and then just give us your social media plugs for your podcasts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is a top tier, amazing movie. 1994. It's easily one of my favorite action films, not just from that year, but you know what? I put it probably in my top 25. I absolutely love this one. One thing we haven't talked about that I think does need to be mentioned is that this was released by New Line Cinema. And so I wholeheartely miss the days of New Line Cinema. What is great about them is all of the films that came out of New Line, they all had a very similar texture and feel and kind of taste about them, if you will. I think the closest thing we have to them nowadays is Lionsgate, but Lionsgate is so much bigger than I think they were. But man, New Line, it's almost like all of the movies that New Line Cinema did, it almost felt like they kind of existed in the same universe. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I know what you mean by that. Yeah. For sure. There's a very there's certain companies. There's certainly companies like that. Particularly companies that made a lot of action pictures, like New World Pictures and Canon and stuff like that. And New Line Cinema is like another one of those companies. It does feel like a kind of distinctive extended universe, as people would say now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. They did another one around the same time as this. That was another one of those VHSs that I had that I watched a few times. Man's Best Friend. Do you remember that one?
Oh, no, who's in that?
Killer. Oh, it's about the killer Rottweiler dog. Oh my gosh, it's so ridiculous and silly, but it's amazing. So it's Ali Sheedy and Lance Henriksen are in that one, and that one came out around the same time. The reason I know that is because I distinctly remember watching the VHS for both of these films, and they had trailers for each film on those respective. Yeah. So, but anyway, no. Scott, this has been, I mean, when you gave me the lineup of films that you had covering, I mean, it was pretty much a no-brainer that I wanted to cover this one, and I'm glad we were able to make it work despite the scheduling snafus. So thank you very, very much. It's been a ton of fun to rewatch it again and reminisce with you.
Excellent, excellent. No, that's all right. It's, you know, there can always be scheduling snafus, particularly when you're living in New Zealand on the other side of the earth from most people that I talk to on this podcast. So it's perfectly fine. And yeah, it's been great. It's been great talking to you. And yeah, this was a first time watch for me. I enjoyed the movie, as you listeners can probably tell from our conversation. It's fun. It's you know, it's just over 90 minutes. It's a pretty tight movie. You know, there's some goofiness. There's the odd flaw. There's the odd kind of weird edit. You know, like maybe the script isn't necessarily top tier, but a lot of the acting is top tier. The action, very solid. Ice-T, a fun lead. You know, yeah. If you want like a kind of nice kind of Friday night chill Friday night movie, you want to stick on, this is a perfect kind of fun little action flick. So I can definitely recommend it on those terms. Yeah, and it's been great chatting to you, Sean, as always. You didn't give out the social media stuff for your podcast?
Yeah.
So remember to do that before we head on out, and then I'll do mine, and then we'll wrap this sucker up.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so I Must Break This podcast. It is the Dolph Lundgren fan podcast where we take a look at all of the films and the extensive filmography of the great pillar of action cinema that is Mr. Dolph Lundgren. We are currently kind of nearing the tail end of his filmography, but a lot of really fun films are in the back catalog of episodes. We have over 100 episodes as of this recording that are available, and that we're on iTunes. Stitcher's no longer around. Apparently, I just found out, but we're
no, it's dead now. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So we're on iTunes and SoundCloud, and I think there's a few others out there. But and you've agreed to join me for the Dolph versus Zombies film Dead Trigger, which I guess is based on a mobile game of some kind. So we're going to pencil that in here in the next month or two to discuss that one. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll look forward to that. And yeah, people can follow this podcast on all your social medias. We're on Facebook. We are at All 90s Action on Twitter, if that still exists next February. Yeah, that's basically where you can find us. And you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, I think on SoundCloud, a bunch of other podcatchers, and also on the Last of the Action Hero podcast network, where Sean's podcast can also be listened to, amongst a whole lot of other great action podcasts that you should all check out. But that's all for this time. Thanks for joining us this month, and be sure to join us next month when we will be talking about the 1994 Mel Gibson Western, Maverick. Until then, though, see ya.